Hello, everyone. I hope you all are doing just great out there. So, let's talk about reporting on minorities. So, keep in mind that we are in our week 9 of MCOM 201 news reporting course, and we are discussing beat reporting and specialized reporting. So, let's talk about reporting on minorities. So, when we talk about reporting on minorities, so this is beat or genre of reporting that is not quite popular in Pakistan. Most of the television channels, they do not spare reporters to specifically report on minorities. There is less reporting that has been done on minorities and minority rights in Pakistan from past, let's say, since the inception of this country. And especially with the emergence of electronic media and social media, again, minority reporting hasn't got its share in these two mediums as well. Um, because there are a lot of minority communities, ethnic or language groups which are absorbed into our nation when borders were redrawn, possibly by colonial powers or independence. Example of this are the Kurdish minorities in Turkey or the Nepalese people in Zimbabwe, Hindus and Sikhs in Pakistan, people who were brought into your country perhaps centuries ago, either to provide special labor, such as Indians in Fiji and South Africa, or the Chinese and Tamils in Malaysia, or to deal with the overcrowding in their home countries, such as uh, Gibraltaris in the Solomon Island, or for some other reasons where you could have minorities in your country. uh, People who have escaped neighboring countries as refugees, such as Palestinian in Lebanon, or the West Iranian in Papua New Guinea, or Afghans in Pakistan. So there could be many minorities, people who have come to your country as an individual looking for better life, such as Afro-Caribbean people in Britain or Italian in Australia. So indigenous people who have become a minority in their own lands of migration from elsewhere, such as Amazonian Indian of Brazil, or the Maoris of New Zealand, or Kailashi people in north of Pakistan. It's people who have developed separate identities because of their religion, such as Sikhs in India, or um, Bhais in Iran, or Ahmadis in Pakistan. So you need to understand minorities are very different from your mainstream readers or listeners because they may not be of the same race, religion, or language, or the same group. They may have different customs. They may not share the same likes and dislikes, interests, or concerns as the majority in your population. They may require different types of news on different issues presented in different ways. So you need to understand one point, that minorities are different. They are different. So, in order to understand, you need to know your audience. It is important as a journalist to know who the readers or listeners are. The nearer the journalist is to the finished product, whether a newspaper or magazine, a radio, television, or a bulletin, the more important that need becomes. Religious, moral, economic beliefs are also different. They have to know the nature and history of the area, the kind of people the schools and colleges are producing, what are the religious, moral, and economic beliefs in the community. In other words, they need to know the character of their audience, both in the mainstream community and in any minorities as well. Do not make assumptions. Do not assume, do not make false assumptions about your readers or listeners. Do not generalize from your own personality and narrow group of friends and relatives that assume that your readers or listeners are like us. Your audience may not all be like you, especially when it includes minority group. So you need to understand. So you need to do a survey kind method. The most accurate way of understanding minority is from scientifically conducted surveys. The next best way is to conduct your own survey. This may be possible in a small and tight-knit minority, but it is usually impossible in large minorities like Ahle Tashi in Pakistan. A third possibility is to draw up a rough profile or picture from the information which is already available. Consider what you know already about the specific minority. Divide that knowledge into a number of categories, which you can analyze individually. Ask members of the minority and experts, such as social workers and teachers, for detail on these categories. These categories you can examine, and the kind of questions you need to ask will include this. How big is the minority? Number one. If you want to report on certain minority, you need to understand what is the density of that minority. You may need to split this into components along racial, religious, or language lines. For example, uh, have a large Hindu minority within your country, you may be able to find an approximate number of them through an official census or by asking the organizers of their associations or priests in their temples. Be aware, though, that the people giving you figures may overestimate or underestimate the size of their community, depending how they want people to see it. Where do they live? Do they live in one area, or are they scattered throughout the rest of the society? This is important to know because minorities which live in specific, well-defined areas often share and keep those features which make them minorities, such as language, religion, culture, or nationality. Like most of the Hindu communities, they are living in interior Sindh, all right? Most of the Sikh communities, they are mostly based in Punjab and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Whereas those who are scattered are often more like the wider society. They may be more integrated into it. What languages do they speak? The third important thing you need to understand, if the minority uses its own language, you need to estimate how many speak only the minority language. How many speak the national language with the equal fluency, and how many know the minority language from parents but no longer use it. You find a large portion of your population rely on the language other than the national language or the languages, you may want to consider setting aside special edition or section of your newspaper or bulletins for their language. That means whatever, if you are covering a minority and the large population speak their own native language, your transmission or your newspaper or your radio transmission should be in their native language. Like Radio Pakistan and PTV, they do their transmissions in a lot of different regional languages as well. Again, you need to understand the age group. If most of the minority are elderly, they may have different needs to those minorities where the bulk of is school age, in school age. Age differences can occur depending on the history of the minority in your country. Again, if the minority is a separate ethnic group which is being absorbed into the mainstream community, the only people left following the old culture may be the old people. If they are refugees fleeing to your country with their families, they may be mainly younger parents and their children. Again, you need to understand, are they mainly male or the female? Although most minorities are roughly equal male to female, you should be aware of the different needs either of the sexes has. For example, most of your readers or listeners may be men. Do the women also want to join your audience but find nothing to interest them? Do the women find other media gives them a better service than yours? You need to understand that when you are covering minorities. Another important factor is to understand your minority is how educated they are. What kind of educational background do they have? This will help you to decide not only what kind of news they might be interested in, but also the best way of presenting it for maximum understanding. Should you use simple language? How long will they pay attention to an article or a program? That all depends on the educational background. Socioeconomic background is again very important to understand your minority. This question helps you to picture the kind of incomes your readers or listeners have. An important element in deciding which news to cover in areas such as family, finance, taxation, wages, hobbies, etc. So their social, let's say, most of the Hindus living in interior Sindh, they are poor. um, they are unable to earn their livelihood. Um, they do not have access to better health facilities. Probably the news related to their health facilities provided to them will mostly attract them. Probably new avenues of livelihood will actually draw their attention to your transmission or your article. If the minority is very poor, you may want to produce a low-cost newspaper or a magazine aimed specifically at them. Once you have clear estimate of your minority audience or audiences, you must find out what kind of news they want. This is slightly different from the question, what kind of news should they get? A question which suggests that they might not always choose everything we think they should know. So from your profiles, your readers or listeners need you for their total news, features, current affairs, intakes for none of it, or for something in between. If they need you for some, but not all of their news, which parts should you be supplying and which parts are being supplied by other media? Either the mainstream media or by newspaper magazines or broadcasting stations in their own minority language. Again, we will define this as a news from anywhere in the world. Expect your country and the country the minority may have come from originally or have special connections with because of shared race, history, and religion. Like most of the American TV channels like Voice of America and in England, BBC, and they are running their Urdu service because they have Pakistani diaspora and Indian diaspora in their countries. So in order to provide them news from their own countries, they have their Urdu transmissions. Because most countries are now related to each other, it is possible to argue that important events in some countries will influence everyone. An arms agreement between the United States and the Soviet Union is an example. People are interested in unusual things happening in the countries with which they have no connection. For example, a major bus crash in Scotland is tragic in human terms and will interest your readers or listeners who otherwise have no connection at all with Scotland. National news. If you work for mainstream media, you have the duty to tell all your people about what is happening in the country. So there are also specific areas affecting new minorities, such as citizenship or immigration issues or laws. So the mainstream media may not generally cover these depths, or if they do, um, they view them from the perspective of a problem for the mainstream society. But you have to see this problem as a perspective of minority. So you should aim to write for the minorities themselves on issues which would affect their life or status in your country. So news about the minority community itself. This is a journalist sensitive to minority issues can be especially important in providing an informed and balanced view of what is happening in the minority communities. So minorities may have their own newspaper or broadcasting stations, although these may give a one-sided view of the local affair. For other minorities, your newspaper or station may be the only regular source of news for many people. Minorities often find themselves in unusual circumstances in relation to the rest of the society, and that happens all the time. So they will probably be interested in knowing about other people in similar circumstances, whether or not they come from their own group. So these are very important issues in community reporting. Um, Unfortunately, in Pakistan, we do not have a specific channel that covers a specific minority. We have obviously one channel that is called Isaac that covers religious activities of Christian community, but we do not have a channel that specifically covers uh, Hindu minorities or Sikh minorities. So in order to cover minorities, you need to understand all these elements. So that's it for today. Next time we'll meet, we'll talk about election reporting. Take care of yourself. Bye bye.